think we're good to go. Oops. Okay. Are you guys able to hear me at the back? All right. Perfect. Louder? That's probably better. How about now? Better? Okay, perfect. Cool. So I work for StrongLoop, and we are the company backing, or we have bet our future on Node.js. We employ most of the core contributors of Node.js. And number one use case that Node.js is really used for is building APIs. So I'm not going to showcase product. You guys will figure it out yourself. What I'm going to demonstrate today is how easily you could be building your own mobile backend as a service, or really your own API backend, or BAS as it's known in Node.js, right? You could do it on your Mac. You can do it on your own servers. Do it anywhere, okay? Okay, so first of all, why do I need an API backend? But before I go into that question, how many folks here have a Node.js background? Okay, a few, including myself. I just learned Node 6 months back. Okay, how many of here people have a Java or a .NET background? Quite a few again. Okay, so APIs in the Java world, right, have existed for a long, long time. And when I say why do I need an API backend, this is a different type of API we are talking about. These APIs have to be lightweight. They have to speak, deal with JSON type lightweight payloads. And what are they serving? They are serving mobile apps for a lot of cases, majority use cases. Sometimes they could be serving an Internet of Things based M2M app, right? If you're dealing with evented payloads of data. Or you could be writing an Angular app for that instance, right? What you need to do is you need these APIs to surface you the data that's hidden behind your data stores. And this could be, which you are not able to access using your normal legacy SOA infrastructures, right? If you were using SOAP or whatever, okay? So if I was a gamer, for example, I would use an API to build a mobile application which needs to produce or consume data, right? Enormous amount of data. And what Node.js is really awesome at is extreme high concurrency and extreme scaling in terms of I/O. If I might need an API backend if I'm actually trying to provision a backend on a service, right? Like we just heard a service from Accelerator, right? Or maybe I'm a mobile developer and all I care about is getting access to a REST base, a JavaScript base, an iOS or an Android app, and I just need to make it talk to a backend API. Or maybe I'm an enterprise developer and I need to talk to Oracle, or I need to talk to SQL Server, or maybe to an ATG Dynamo, or maybe I have a SOAP, SOA stack which was written in, is delivered using SOAP protocol, and I need to surface all those valuable, rich data up to my mobile apps, right? And I'm not just talking about CRUD operations, right? CRUD is solved, okay? We are really talking about taking it to the next level where you are doing more complex transactions with those APIs, okay? Let me play this bigger. So how would you make this happen, right? This is a designer's approach to building APIs, right? Nothing to do with product or anything like that. So you are dealing with different types of data models. So the first thing that comes in mind is ORM, right? You need to build good models to serve your APIs. You could be ingesting free-form data, right? You could be talking where you have specific schema definitions in a relational database, okay? You might also need to discover, you might not be working with a brand new database altogether. Maybe it's an existing data store, right? Has millions of customer records in there, product data in there. So you're not just creating something from scratch. In MySQL, we are just inserting 2 or 3 records and you're playing with it. You're dealing with existing data. So you need to discover what those data objects are and process it, right? Or you might be jumping on to just working with JSON payloads, right? Or maybe with a non-SQL database where all you care about is reading from JSON documents and serving JSON documents on the front end, maybe trying to put together a full stack JavaScript solution, okay? And another challenge that you would face while modeling is you model the data and you make updates to that data. However, on the back end, can you synchronize those models? And I'll come to what I mean by synchronization. Assume you have 2 data sources, right? Maybe there's a MongoDB somewhere and there's a SQL server somewhere. And you are pulling objects and you perform CRUD operations. And after that operations are done, you want to synchronize the state of that hybrid model into both those data stores. So synchronization is another problem that you need to address, okay? So I'm going to demonstrate a quick, and you can actually, if you have a laptop, you can execute this of NPM. What we are trying to do is we will scaffold a Node.js API server. Obviously, we are using an npm install -g strong CLI. Strong CLI is nothing but what StrongLoop has done. It distributes a set of modules on top of core Node.js, and we do contribute to the core as well, right? I'm going to create a project. I'm going to create a SQL connector, okay? And then in that SQL connector, I'm going to point it at a data source, an actual MySQL server. We'll create a model of an account data interactively, and then we'll show that how you can surface it on the front end. Okay. All right. So the first step you do, maybe it might make sense to, I'll go through the slides, but what I really want to do, if you guys are interested, is maybe walk you guys through a live demo of this, okay? So once I create my project, what I can do is I will work with a data sources.json file where I can point where my data resides. So this data could be on a cloud server, it could be within your existing data sources, okay? And then I can actually go and create the app there. So let's do a real-time simulation of this. Oh, by the way, if you are interested in the source code, you can. I'll share this deck. You can just get it off GitHub on a community module. So there's a connector called LoopBack MySQL example. There are MongoDB examples. We have an Oracle connector example, so you can play around. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stick to the text just to make sure this is not mocked up, and I'm exactly going to follow the steps outlined here. Okay. Is this console readable from the back?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the first step is obviously installing the strong CLI. I already have that. So I have, which is installing StrongLoop, but that's not the point, right? I want to just get directly started. So when I install StrongLoop, I get a command line wrapper around Node.js, so I could use Node.js as well. But I'm just going to do slc lb, that's LoopBack, project, LoopBack, MySQL, example. Okay, so I just created a project, and I am going to get inside that project. Okay, so let's see what's inside that package. There's a normal app.js. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data source, a model that I'm going to, so this project, when I install the example, it's a sample Node.js application which is meant to render APIs, right? But I have to connect it to the data source before I can actually render those APIs. So I'm going to create a data source here. Okay. see. Oops, sorry. Okay, so it just went and created a data source, but there's no data behind that yet. So let me go in there, and you can see that it created a file called as the data source JSON file, which lets me specify which database I'm going to connect to. So I can view it. Okay, so it has certain parameters. I could be connecting, if I'm trying to read a JSON object, a file-based object, I could be connecting to an in-memory data store. So that's specified by DB. If I am trying to push a notification to a mobile app, I could be connecting with a different one. I could be connecting with a mail server. I could be even connecting to a MySQL one. But that's undefined where that is. Okay. Okay. So next, I'm going to create an account, which is a model. So I'm beginning my modeling process now. So I'll do SLC, LB, model, and actually, let's see, account. Okay, account is good. So with this, what I'm really trying to do is I'm going to create a model, which is the name is account, and I'm going to reference that data source, which is MySQL. So one thing to note here, I haven't actually connected my database yet, but I'm still able to proactively model what I need. Okay. Okay. So it asks me for names of some accounts. So I'll just say, what's this meetup called? Baynode or Packer Dojo?
Baynode.
Baynode. Okay. Okay. I'll put myself in. Okay, and I can say, okay, what type of property is it? I'm going to just say string, create this model. Yes. Okay, so it basically created an account model with it. 2 parameters, has a string, it's Baynode, and Shubrakar is the author of it. Okay. So now I want to expose this. So I'm going to install one of my connectors, LoopBack. LoopBack by the source, like the entire stack is fully open source, so you can download it. We have pre-built connectors for a variety of data sources. So I'm going to use one of the connectors here. Install. Okay. Okay. So the next step is what I'm going to do is I can actually connect to a real SQL server. So you must have noticed that this data sources JSON file defines a connector, but there isn't a actual database behind it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to literally copy paste code from here. Okay. So this could be any server, by the way, right? And on the fly, I could be switching to a MongoDB or an Oracle, as long as I have the right connector to talk to that. Oops. Okay. So now I'm going to spin up this application. Okay. So I could have run it just node app.js. That will do it. Or I'm going to run it in a slightly scalable way with a cluster. And I have an 8-core machine, so I'm going to use 3 cores of the machine and spin up a cluster. Okay. So I have an application. Let's see what that application looks like. Okay, so that's the APIs right away published in a RESTful interface. We actually used another open source project here called Swagger. So this is really a Swagger plot of it. Now, if I go into some of those data points, applications or accounts, for example, my account actually exists in one of these. So if I query an account, right, Baynode, and say try it out, what do I get? I get a 404. Why did that happen? What I did not do is I tried to search for that, but what I had created, when I created that account, I had just created that in memory. I did not actually persist it to the backend SQL server, okay, or to the MySQL server. If that data had existed there, you can actually pull real information out, right? Okay. Let me make this window smaller. Yeah, so if you're looking at, why is this? Oops. Something. Yeah, the screen is staggered a little bit. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, the screen is a bit funky. Let me try and open up a brand new one. Yeah, no good.
The browser is stretching all the way to the.
Yeah, there's something on that which are the.
You gotta pull it from the corner and shrink the whole browser.
Oh.
And then center it again.
Yeah, I think. Or, yeah, that's better.
Do a shift click on
shift
the
click.
expand button, and it'll fill
Favorite. Okay, that's fine. Just wanted to show some of the raw operations here, right? Okay. So what you are seeing here. I don't know if I can make this a bit bigger, right? Okay, so these are the raw API operations that you can use for CRUD. You can use for crawl operations as well. So you can. So what's really happening behind the scenes here is there is a JSON mapping that happens between your API tier as well as your backend data sources. Okay, most of that mapping today has to be done manually, but what you are defining is the data type, and those data types could be different, right? So you're not bound to a string only or an integer only. You can consume free-form data as well, based on what your backend system really is. Okay, so let me go back to my slide deck. Okay, so I'm not gonna demonstrate each of those. Now, if I were using a real database system, the next step I would do is I'll actually do an npm install of SQL Server, MySQL, insert some test data, and see these APIs with my actual test data. Okay, you can actually get the code from the GitHub repo. Now, if I had to switch to another data source, right? I did my initial modeling against MySQL, but I want to synchronize those models in MongoDB. How do I do that? All that is needed is in that data source.json file. I just have to add connector information to MongoDB, and the translation. What will happen is the data source property, for the account model will now be MongoDB, and the translation will happen automatically under the hood. That's what the frameworks handles for you. Okay. Okay. So that's actually a 5-minute demo how to build your own API server. This is what we do. This was probably the industry's one of the first open source Node.js, pure Node.js based API solution. So you can stand up your own API stack. We added connectors. We've added an in-memory one, a MongoDB one, an Oracle, REST, MySQL. Recently, we added a SQL Server, a SOAP connector, even an ATG Dynamo one. You can auto-discover as long as you pop in the connector. So you can get it off NPM, you can get it off GitHub, drop in a connector, auto discover. Your node application talks to these, discover the objects. You can slice, dice the data in your modeling. You can do aggregation as well, and it handles the latency behind it. And once you do that, it will auto-generate the JSON API for you. But there are key services which are pre-built into these open source modules. Like if you're doing mobile development, you might need push notification. You may need geolocation. You need user device. We also have a set of open SDKs on the front-end side. So these SDKs, initially we developed native ones for iOS and Android, but we have recently published an Angular SDK, JavaScript one. And we are teaming up with the Angular team at Google and launching some full-stack JavaScript frameworks. It's not really a framework, it's a reference implementation. The first of the stall is called Bacon, Bootstrap, Angular, Cordova, Node. So what the SDKs give you is a set of libraries. You can just pull them into your application, and instantaneously you get access to the data models that we just created on the back end. Now, those models on the client side and the server side are absolutely the same. So if you were chasing a use case, something like offline sync, where you did not have an internet connection and your app is running, it could be an Angular app, for example, and you need to store the state of a transaction in memory, into the browser or in memory, or maybe even to the device, you can do that on the client side. As soon as you get an internet connection, you can do the synchronization over the wire. And that can only happen if you maintain the same isomorphism of the models on both the front end and the back end. And when you start exposing these APIs out from the consumption perspective, there are API models. So if you are familiar with node modules like Passport, Passport is a authentication module, has about 308 ways of doing different AA functions. We used Passport. We also integrated and provided OAuth support. So if you are using some OAuth provider, you can basically get a token for the API. And the token, the framework validates the token. So there is validation built in, both at the model level as well as the method within the model level. So it can read the metadata behind the token and say, okay, this user request, should it have access to this API call on the backend? Okay. So value adds, we want to drive more adoption for LoopBack, particularly in the community. It's open source, fully extensible by design, so feel free to fork it. On premises, wherever you want to deploy, we don't care. We want to leverage your existing data and services, right? That's really the value that you're going to get. We can dynamically save data from mobile clients, so CRUD operations and all these services are built in. And we will be going, we are looking to build, okay, what all other endpoints from an integration perspective you should have. So Bacon emerged as a stack. We also started building an Ionic framework and a Backbone.js integration into Node to make that seamless. Okay. You can read our blogs. We have tons and tons of them. We put out we are literally blogs. We will be known for the blog company, if not anything else. So we don't do t-shirts, but we do blogs. 3 blogs a week. Find us, and if you have any questions, send us a note at callback@strongloop.com. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Do you guys have some sort of converter, or do you guys have in the pipeline some sort of converter to take all of the data that somebody may have in their data source and kind of convert that? Because you're demonstrating the process where you're actually building the model.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying, okay, align that with the database. So if I have 30 tables as an example,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's too much, but it sounds like at this point, whoever's going to be using StrongLoop, they have to manually create the models. You see what I'm saying?
No, you can actually consume an existing data store where you have existing data. So instead of creating that model, you will actually create the model. The model is, it's a JSON object, but instead of adding that to the data source, you will attach it to an existing data source. So there is an operation there which is just attach. And the model definitions are, you can have like a control base, like the text that we consume, that can be pretty controlled or it could be free form. So you could give it a range, and when you attach to the data source, the discovery, we discover what's there in the relational database, all your tables. We can actually consume it. It will automatically be discovered and attached to that model.
Right. But you have to manually call out, you have to go through that process of actually saying, here's my model, here are the attributes, here's the data types of those attributes.
Yes.
Despite the fact that you may already have your database created.
Yes, so you'll have to define what the model looks like, but that's like, okay, these models, what are the data types? And you can try to be a little bit more abstract and generic to consume like wider ranges so that you don't have to go into each and every different types of data. So you can keep it free form, for example, right? We are trying to make that process simpler where you don't even have to define it anymore.
Exactly, that's what I was getting at.
Yep.
I mean, it's fine, but
Yep.
you kind of go through a process where you're always iterating and changing, like, okay, I gotta
Yes.
redo this model. I mean,
Yeah.
it's maybe it takes like 30 minutes or something.
Yes, so we are interviewing open source users for should we build it into a console of some kind, right? Like an IDE, which helps you visually, attach it, right? So, anyways, but we are not there yet. But that's a good feedback. Right? It's in the right direction. Yes.
What might be the license for the software which is available on GitHub?
Yeah. So all our modules for LoopBack are fully open source, and for developers we don't charge anything. But when we put some of the enterprise connectors, we basically make money on support. So if you are putting this on X number of servers and you need dedicated support for that, then you basically, instead of just going off the open source version, you can buy subscription. But other than that, it's fully open source.
What license of open source?
Yeah, so generally we, like, all of these are recomposable modules. It's not a monolithic framework, right? So you could generally be packaged under an MIT or an artistic plus StrongLoop or an MIT plus StrongLoop. Okay.
They're commercial friendly.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, that's it.